one of the first steps when you're building your ADU, oh, find a builder, find a builder. But it's not that simple. And when you start lining up multiple builders to like get multiple bids and compare them, it's a lot of work. Every builder's kind of got their own way of forming their agreement, of explaining their process. Those documents and the actual processes can be really different. And so it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a little overwhelming. I was chatting with some longtime collaborators over at BuildZig, and I was like, "You guys do a ton of different agreements because they're GCs. They also just help people do funds control, so they see a lot of agreements and payment schedules." And I said, "Well, could you just help us understand the ABCs of what a builder's agreement looks like, and what are the different parts people should expect?" And how do you compare them when they're different? So I'm very excited. I got Laura Blair and Carlos Pizzola on from BuildZig. They're going to talk to us about the ABCs of these builder contracts. Do you guys mind telling us a little bit about your background at BuildZig?
Sure. BuildZig has been building in the East Bay in Oakland since 2010. Carlos and I first met when we both worked in the city of Oakland. I was a land use attorney for the city of Oakland, and Carlos worked for the chief of staff for the council president. And we left and formed BuildZig, and we started out on our own developments and have been bringing those services to consumers. So unlike a lot of contractors, and service providers, we have been at risk and have made the mistakes, so you don't have to. You want to keep going?
Right, and I just want to piggyback off what you said. Building is difficult. It's complex. There's a lot to it, and people get into it and think, okay, I'll get through this pretty easily. And next thing you know, they're filing for divorce or they're going through depression, and it's a tough thing. As background, as Laura mentioned, I was chief of staff to Oakland City Council president. I was his go-to person for getting things built in the city, busting through the bureaucracy, if you will. Yeah, I started falling in love with all the development projects and decided that I wanted to be a developer. So we've not only built our own projects, we've also helped a lot of people build their own as well. And think of us as kind of coaches through the process for people who want to become their own developer for a moment in time or permanently. We train brokers, we train real estate agents, small investors on how to become developers, but we also just help people get their projects built and take the complexity out of it and just try to make it as simple as possible for people. That's our role.
Perfect. All right, so let's make it as simple as possible for people. You guys, where do you want to start in this big old conversation? What's the most important thing we get across first?
Well, the first step is who you hire. And even before you're going to get into contract, you're going to vet your design team. You have folks that are going to help you with your planning and building permit submittal, and you're going to have folks that are going to execute on that plan, and they're going to build. Carlos, who are the people that folks typically hire in the design team?
Yeah, so when you're looking to build an ADU, because I think the topic today is ADU or small projects, you certainly want to get a designer, and it's important that you hire the right designer or architect, two different things. So a designer does not necessarily have to be an architect. You might find many people who are experienced in designing ADUs who are not licensed architects, and they're perfectly great designers. They just don't come with the architectural license. And you want to pick the right designer for your project. So don't pick a high-rise architect for your small ADU because you'll pay about 10 times more than you have to for the same thing. So you want to pick someone who is focuses on small projects, and that way you're paying for exactly what you get. So you want your designer or your architect. You want your Title 24 person, and oftentimes the Title 24 person, they're the ones Title 24 simply refers to that state code, Title 24, that requires energy efficiency in all projects, and it's a highly specialized thing to do. So there's actually people who specialize in just ensuring that your project is energy compliant. They oftentimes work with the architects. Oftentimes the designers, architects have their own Title 24 people. So you probably will get them when you hire the architect. You also want to bring in a structural engineer. And for this, you want to also refer to either your project manager, if you're working with someone like BuildZig, who project manages all of these things, or your architect. They will know structural engineers that serve that type of product. And then you need a surveyor. You need a surveyor that basically tells you here's where your land boundary is, here's where your setback requirements are going to be for your ADU. don't build past this part. So the cities usually require a surveyor, the designs, the structural designs, your Title 24, and then there's a few other little consultants here and there, such as if you have a tree in the way, you may need to get a tree surveyor, a tree consultant, HERS tester, someone who will test your ducting to make sure that it's right. But your project manager, if it's building, or architect or designer, usually they have a good list of design professionals. And so that's just on the design side.
And
Laura, that's what was your
so that's
question.
kind of a big list of all the different kinds of vendors who can contribute to like that plan set and like the actual application for a permit. And just because a lot of people are kind of all over the state, you guys are doing a lot of projects in the East Bay specifically, and those urban projects almost always require boundary surveys and stuff because people are building right up against the lot line or 4 feet from it or whatever. Whereas if you're watching this out in a rural county, it's much more likely you'll get away without a boundary survey. If you're on a sloped lot, you'll need a topographic survey, right? Like all of this gets so in the details of like what the checklist for your application will require. But but you're saying if you work with an architect or if you work with a project manager, it's very likely that they'll know who to pull into that for you. And if you piece it together, you're gonna have to figure all this stuff out.
Yeah, I think that that's correct. I guess I would also say that it really helps because it is hyper local once you get to those application requirements. And so finding a designer or an architect who has successfully built in that city is really critical because a lot of these requirements sometimes if you're not experienced don't come up necessarily in the application phase, but as you're building they'll say, "Well, where's your survey?" And if you didn't get through it, it's going to stall your project. So really working part of the vetting process should be asking and looking at those ADUs that they've built in your area.
And an important thing also to consider is there more and more there are companies that are emerging like ourselves who are project managers of the process, and they will help you identify an architect, because if you start with an architect and you pick the wrong architect, then the chances are you may also end up with the wrong Title 24, the wrong engineer, the wrong contractor down the line. Project manager helps you hone in and make sure you're picking the right people all along the way. Then you just have to pick the right project manager, but there's a lot of good ones out there. So that's the design side, and then we have the build side. So
Yeah, because that list didn't have a builder in it.
that's right. And probably the most important decision you'll ever make is picking the right contractor, or the builder is the contractor, and that can go in many different directions. But I'll kick it back to you, Laura.
Again, wanting to vet your contractor and make sure that they've built an ADU in your jurisdiction. There are a lot of local policies that you cannot even find on a website that the city may have about your ADU that might happen uh, in the inspection process. And so you want to be able to make sure that you're dealing with somebody who's experienced and has gone through the process before, so they're not just learning on your job. You want to try to reach out to at least three contractors so that you can get different bids and get sense of how they're scoping out your project. And you want to talk to people who've had the experience. You want to get their referrals and then actually talk to those folks and ask questions about how their experience was and if they would build with that contractor again.
Mhm.
Check their license, make sure they have insurances in place and bonds in place, and you can find that on the California State Licensing Board website.
Yeah, we'll throw a link in the description below. Could you explain that insurance part is kind of a learning experience for people because they're like licensed or unlicensed? Oh, there's a license. What's the insurance matter for, and what do you look for when you're checking that stuff?
Oh, great question. So just having a license doesn't necessarily mean that you have insurance. And even the minimum insurance requirements that are on the website might not be enough to cover your project. So a contractor is required to have a bond and they're required to have workers' compensation, which really protects their workers on site and also protects you if their workers trip and fall. But then you also want to get actual separate proof of insurance from them, and not just proof of insurance, you want to be added as additional insured onto their policy. So if something happens, you don't have to go through your contractor. You're able to go directly to now you're on the policy as an additional insured, and you're able to go to the insurance company or the broker to get your coverage.
Yeah. So just to put that in perspective, it's like a lot of general contractors, they've gotten their license so that they can take on kind of like kitchen remodels and stuff, right? And like
Exactly.
projects that cost 20 grand, 30 grand. And that's the same license that's required to do a house that costs, I've seen these bids coming in around like 400 grand in the Bay Area. And how do I know that they have enough insurance?
So you're going to look at the, the best thing to do is you probably have a broker for your own policy for your housing policy. Is you get the insurance certificate that it's called a cert, and you get that certification and you get added as additional insured, and then you give it to your own broker, and they'll be able to read it for you. If you don't have that, then you're going to look to make sure look at the coverage amounts and the claim amounts. If they're $20,000, then that's obviously not enough to cover your whole entire ADU. Plus, they could cause damage that's beyond just if they're creating something in and they hit your house, that you need to have coverage for that. So you want to make sure that it's around either the cost of your house or the cost of your ADU, depending on what they're doing.
So I see a lot of different types of agreements go around, and I think some builders are like very back of the napkin, kind of, hey, this is what I think it'll cost. I'll let you know if it changes a little bit. And when you start asking questions like that, they're like, whoa, 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 this is not for me. And that's probably a good thing to discover very early in the process. Do you guys have other advice about what to look at early or what to make sure is in that contract?
We definitely want a written contract, and the most important part of your contract is going to be your scope of work. And a lot of those back of the napkin contracts that you see will say, ADU as the scope. I'm going to build your ADU, and then
Yeah, yeah.
$200,000. This is probably after buying your house going to be the most expensive contract that you are going to sign. And remember when you bought your house, how many iterations of contract you signed the purchase agreement, and then you signed more agreements in escrow and disclosures and disclosures. So this is a proportionate on that size. You don't want to do a back of the napkin, and you really want to make sure, most importantly, that your scope of work is detailed. And on the next slide, we'll kind of show you an example of what a line item budget looks like. And that really explains what your contractor thinks are the components. These line items are the elements of the build, how much it's going to cost. So this helps you understand how they're planning to spend that big lump sum total at the bottom, and also tells you when you're comparing the other contracts. So you'll hopefully have three of these. What the other people thought that the foundation would cost, how much they're planning to spend on lumber, and if there's a big difference, you can have an educated conversation about why those costs are different. The other thing that's really important to include, so first we've got the scope of work. So what is included in this contract? And we really want the details as to the budget. We don't want ADU 200,000. We want lumber this amount, foundation this amount, elements of the foundation this amount, and then you want to know what's not included. And that's really oftentimes when you're comparing contracts, what the big difference is. So are finishes included? Who's paying for the permit? Who is handling the utilities? All of these things can be really big cost items. And if you have one contractor that's all inclusive and giving you a soup to nuts contract that's including from permit expediting all the way through to finishes and a punch list, and then you have another contractor that has excluded finishes, is not paying for the permit, and is having you handle utilities, you're not comparing apples to apples, and you don't know who the cheaper bid is.
Yeah, I'll add to that that probably just as important as what's in the scope of work is really to be persistent about getting from your contractor what is excluded. And you may have to ask a few times and put it in writing in an email. And really, you're just trying to protect yourself. It's not that contractors necessarily are trying to hide what's excluded. It's just that sometimes they don't even think about it. Particularly if they're new to ADUs and may not have a lot of experience in that arena. And so by asking what's excluded now, you're forcing them to think about what they're gonna not be able to charge for, uh, and uh, and then you can sort of push that issue so that they give you a nice exclusion list, and then also to list their assumptions. So, for example, um, tile applications. It's a big difference in cost if you're installing 1 inch by 1 inch tiles, and if you're installing 12 inch by 12 inch tiles, the order of magnitude is huge in terms of cost to the contractor. So you as a builder, as a homeowner building, may think, oh, I really want to put this very small tile in there, and then you give that to the contractor. You say, here's the finish I've chosen for my bathroom, and the contractor says, I'm going to charge you 5 times more to install that one, and it's a brand new issue that now you have to grapple with the contractor. Perhaps it delays your job. So you really want to flesh all of these things out up front, and really ask them to clarify all of these items as much as possible. So once you start your job, it's smooth, and as much planning as you can do on the front end to design a good project, but also design a good contract. That makes your job flow much more smoothly.
So it sounds like there's kind of two goals that we've got while we're sharing this information, right? One is, hey, here's the basics that every agreement should have, so that you can judge the agreement. It should have a scope of work. It should have stuff that's explicitly included and broken out by line items. Hopefully, it should have it should have some exclusions, or a nothing's excluded, everything's included, which I haven't seen personally, but those parts are there just so you have a sound agreement where you understand and you've had the communication with the builder of like, what's this cover, what doesn't this cover. And the classic example that you threw in there was like, oh, some builders pull the permit for you, and it's them on the permit, and they're doing a lot of that. And other times they're really not into that part, and they would rather have clients who are either doing it themselves or have an architect, have a project manager who's doing that part. um, okay, so that's like one body of like just making a good agreement with that human, or company. The other thing that I think we're talking about here is like how to compare apples to apples. And even if you kind of have the first conversation, you get three agreements from three different builders, and they're great agreements each individually. But sometimes, right, like one guy, one contractor says framing, and it includes a bunch of material costs and labor over here. Another person kind of breaks it down differently, so that like I'm not coming up with the right example here, but the categories aren't identical across all these agreements ever. So like, how do I sit down and actually compare apples to apples once everything's either included or excluded?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. Some contractors just do carpentry, rough carpentry, or as a line item, but then other contractors will break out the kitchen and they'll say kitchen line item, which includes carpentry, and
Yeah.
bathroom, which includes carpentry, and trim, which includes carpentry, and so there's just no way to compare. This is where your exclusions are so important, because then you can say, okay, well, now I've compared the exclusions, which are far, you should be less than your total line items, and you say, okay, they're excluding about the same thing, which means they should include about the same thing, and then you can compare apple to apple in terms of the bottom cost. But one of the challenges is that contractors use a lot of different formatting. There is a standardized bidding format, but small contractors don't use those. Most large contractors do use those standardized formatting. But yeah, it's hard to compare apples to apples unless you're just looking at exclusions most of the time.
Okay. Okay. And then I think another word that comes up a lot in this, I think this is the time to talk about it, is like allowances. What can you explain that concept and like how it plays in here?
Sure.
Yeah, and Laura, I'm going to our finishes slide so that you can reference that.
The most often time that you see allowances is in discussing finishes. A lot of times in construction, this is really kind of where there's a lot of discretion around your budget. If you have to build a foundation, you have to build a foundation, and it's going to have to meet the certain safety and building code requirements. But with your finishes, you can build it to your own specific taste level, or that you're having, or this is you might be using kind of lower end finishes because you really don't particularly care. But when you're looking at your overall cost, you have to know first whether or not, like we were talking about, are finishes included or excluded, and then if the finishes are included in the budget, what kind of assumptions or allowances are being made for those finishes. So you might include a finish schedule or a finish allowance budget, which shows how much the contractor is assuming that you're going to be spending on your finishes. So it might say, for an example, flooring, we're going to assume that it's going to cost, $2,000 for the flooring. If it goes over that amount of money, then you're going to be coming out of pocket. So that's really good for you to know because you're going to be selecting your finishes, and then you're not going to go and pick like the Taj Mahal um, flooring because you've got $2,000 to play with. It also means, and this is where you got to track your own budget, is if you find a deal and Lumber Liquidators is having a deal and you made a deal with your cousin and you're able to get the flooring for cheaper and you get it for 1,500, the contractor owes you 500. So those finish allowances are super important in helping you decide what you're going to buy, and that's really the experience that you have of your ADU is all of those exterior facing finishes.
And the finish allowance should list out every finish. So faucets, sinks, toilets, tile for the shower doors. So the more detail, the better. And then that allowance, as Laura mentioned, is a number attached to that particular item, and that allows you to track. And so if you want to go more, you can. If you want to go less, you should be able to get the balance that you didn't spend and move it to other line items, or just take it right out of the budget and put it in your pocket as a savings on the project. So a lot of contractors may do something like your total finish allowance is $30,000, but they don't say what's in it. And that's an invitation for potential conflict down the line. So you really want to ask them to break that out by specific fixture and equipment that might be on site. Even like your water heater, you'll want to know what's my finish allowance for my water heater, because they can range from $1,700 for a hybrid water heater to $3,800 depending on the tank size. So you'll want to know what the assumptions are there by encouraging them to line item those as well.
And we didn't talk about it. We were talking about the contract, but another important thing to know on the front end is who's responsible for ordering the finishes and bringing them to the site. And you have to start ordering your finishes, especially in the age of post COVID. You have to start ordering those finishes a lot sooner than you would think. And if the contractor is assuming that you're ordering them and you're assuming that the contractor is ordering them, you could be having your ADU without windows and doors for quite a while you're waiting for the delivery.
And so that's another benefit because you're talking about finish schedules having these assumptions about allowances. They also have assumptions about time, and
Yeah.
like they should tell you, hey, as a homeowner, you should make the decision about what kind of tile. Well, tile's not as bad, but like windows, you should be making your window decisions real early so that we can order them and have them on time. Or to your point, if you're responsible for putting an order in on a product, so you could do it on time. And then sometimes those affect some of the calculations that we were talking about at the very beginning of the whole shebang. So like you really want all your ducks in a row. Earlier is better. It's always easy to change a plan that you have.
Yeah. And I think, this does sound like a lot of communicating with the contractor. And you're also kind of getting a sense of how they run their business. If they're willing to have these conversations with you, if they're willing to add something into their budget, if they're willing to be transparent, all of that is information that it's good to have before you sign a contract. If you're getting a lot of pushback on getting some of this information, then this contractor might not be for you just because they're not. Imagine how it's going to be going when you're $100,000 in or $50,000 in, and this person is not feeling like they want to be very transparent or share their time with you in order to make sure that you understand.
Yeah, I think a lot of there's so much personality in every job and in every business relationship, and this is like you're gonna it's your property usually, so a lot of the time you're living there. And one of the biggest sources of conflict, I think, is just a mismatch in management styles. So if you are a bit of a micromanager or a close manager, it is it's good to establish that early and make sure that it's a good fit with the builders you're talking to. B, it might also be worth thinking about how much control you want over a process that you have very little experience with. But whatever your path is, you should like get comfy with it early so that you don't try to like pretend you're going to be all I'm the easiest client in the world, and then you actually have expectations, right? And it's good to set that up front. I see so many people just optimizing for the lowest number at the bottom of the contract, right? Like that one grand total line. And they do everything they can to kind of like woo a builder. And it's like that's a bad path. Do all these detailed agreements if that's what if you want the security of knowing how this process is going to go, it's going to set the tone too and kind of filter out who wants to work that way and who's like, oh no, I just improvise.
That's that's a great point, Ryan. The ones where you just try to get that number at the bottom down to as low as possible, those are the ones that really oftentimes lead to struggle or divorce, whatever the big things that happen during a construction process, the turmoil. And I couldn't agree more. It's really about use the contract development process, the exclusions, the inclusions, the finish allowances. All of that is an opportunity to really evaluate whether it's the right contractor for you in terms of process. And so do use that because it's early enough where you can still get out before you sign the contract. If it's just breaking down, you expect emails to be responded to within 24 hours, but it's taking 5 days and you just can't seem to crack that code with the contractor, it may not work moving forward because you're probably working with someone who just doesn't like to be bothered in their process, or maybe they just want to be left alone to do their job and just sign the contract, let me do my business. And that may not be how you work. And so it's a good opportunity to see if it's going to be a good relationship because it is a significant relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, where do we go next? This slide says finishes. That means we're done, right? What else is important to consider when you're talking through all these details?
Well, this is a perfect segue because, we need to talk about change orders. So, Ryan, you were talking about the proverbial client that really drills down, and, some clients really try to get that number as low as possible. And some contractors, unscrupulous contractors, have a way to get back and bring up that price after you've signed your contract, and that would be through change orders. Not all change orders, a lot of most change orders even will be valid, but you need to have in your contract a clear process to outline what you're going to do with change orders. So let's back up and first talk about the common reasons for change orders. Carlos, do you want to go through those?
Sure, yeah. Most often, the two biggest reasons are owner-driven change orders, and these are valid change orders. Owner-driven change orders, so an owner is in the process of design, they couldn't really visualize their project on plans. They start walking through, they say, "Oh, you know what? I really want two pendant lights right there. Can you add two pendant lights?" Or I really I want my bathroom bigger now, and I want to move that wall. Uh, so that's owner-driven change orders. The other one is inspector-driven change orders. So maybe there's something in the plans that didn't quite work in reality. Inspector comes, doesn't like it, and says you need to move this or move that. So those are the two primary sources of valid change orders. Then there's other stuff. There's things in the plans that may have not worked, but they're not really code issues. There's gray area, and this is where owners and contractors have to really have a good relationship because if a contractor feels like he was just really pushed hard downwards to get the job and as Laura mentioned, wants to make it back, there's always gray area in a job that can someone can justify a change order for. It doesn't typically end in a good relationship, so we as contractors try to minimize change orders. Period. To only owner-driven or inspector-driven change orders, and that's really the rule for us. But there's other opportunities to for contractors who are trying to kind of squeeze things a little bit to find gray area in a process. Uh, but there's ways of preventing that, and Laura can go into those.
So really, a change order is a change of plans. Your contractor is bidding to the plan set. So, and really make sure that that happens. They need to see the final building permit set that was approved by the city, so that there aren't any changes on their scope of work, and that should be detailed in the contract. That they've reviewed the plans as of this date, so then that date matches the final plan set date that was submitted. And this also speaks to the how now you're realizing how important your design team is, because if your design team didn't if something is silent or it isn't clear, it's not going to be clear in your contractor's scope of work, and so they're going to interpret it however they're going to interpret it. That might not be what your vision was when you were picturing your ADU, and that's where a lot of conflict happens. So it is worth it to make sure that your design team reflects what you wanted to build, because that's really the foundation of your contract. But now we're talking about your contractors' change orders, and you want to have that process outlined in their contract, so their scope of work is clear, and they're going to you're going to have a process for change orders when there is one of these unanticipated circumstances. And one thing that you need to require is that all change orders are going to be in writing in advance. So you don't want to be, you're coming home from work, you're tired, and it's the end of the day, and your contractor comes, you come into the backyard, how'd it go? Oh, well, we had to knock out that wall, and it's going to be an additional $2,000, but we just went ahead and did it because we wanted to save your time. That is an unauthorized change order under your agreement. If you're including the right language, that cost is on them, because any changes that you're going to pay for need to be agreed to in advance and in writing. The second thing that is helpful to get is to get a change order rate, so an hourly rate of their workers that they anticipate on site, and what the hourly rate would be for those workers, so that you have an understanding of how much that particular item is going to be, and that's how much that they will charge you. Carlos, do you want to explain more about that process?
Yeah, but this is really important because if you're in under the gun, you really want to get your project done, or there's been delays, or you're just in a hurry to move in or rent it out, and you're feeling the pressure, and then something comes up that is a justified change order. If you don't have an hourly rate, then and you don't have a clause in there that says that you are able to then go to another contractor to also bid the change order, which we encourage people to include in their contracts, that they reserve the right to have any contractor bid a change order. If you don't have those in there, then that contractor can come back and potentially charge, 3 or 4 times what they normally would for that item, simply because there's a time pressure, and it's an opportunity to perhaps make up some losses that they had in the job. But you as the homeowner or the client want to kind of reserve the right to bid it out or to audit the costs and to say, well, you said it was going to be $30 an hour for this type of labor, and but I'm being charged $70 an hour here on the change order, so that doesn't seem fair to me. So it's just a way of keeping things honest and transparent. And most contractors are scrupulous and really try to do a good job. Really, what we're talking about here is if you happen to land in one where the situation is not as ethical as it should be.
Yeah, I kind of led us down a garden path by talking about that one scenario, which we do see a lot, right? Like a lot of people want to save money. Everybody wants to save money, so you end up finding yourself with a without a lot of experience in managing projects end to end. The easiest number to optimize for is that bottom line, and if you do that, you do. I do see a very high frequency of change order sort of learning experiences. And those tend to be some of the sort of least detailed agreements too that ended up at that really low number. If you go through the whole process that we're talking about and you end up with a solid agreement, honestly, change orders come up, right? Like you guys, how many jobs go through without a single unexpected uh, change? There's always something. The inspector's got to earn their earn their living, find some things to improve on the job site, and so stuff happens. And then there's other reasons that like could be reasonable too, right? Like if what we were just talking about, site conditions can sort of have unexpected things when you start digging, or supply chain disruption. So a builder might come to you, and this becomes a client order, but it's like, hey, we could wait 12 extra weeks for the cabinets in your plan and your finish schedule, or if you want to finish, I did find something similar 6 weeks down, but it costs a little bit more or whatever, right? Those are all kind of examples. You're like, this is normal, and you just want an agreement that like covers your bases. Is that fair?
Yeah, you want something that covers what's a change order, when it can happen, and what the process is going to be. And as Carlos said, also giving you an out that you can bid out the change order to somebody else so that they don't have
Hmm.
this exclusive right to whatever happens on your property.
How typical is that on these ADU projects? Like, do you see a lot of it? Would you
Very
recommend it
atypical.
as
It's
like
it's
yeah?
really sorry. I'm sorry. It's very typical. It's really an insurance policy
Yeah.
because if if it's if the contractor underbid the job and they are struggling to get back into the black on their project, they may see, replacing upsizing a water heater. Maybe you picked a 40 gallon and you want a 60 gallon now, and the opportunity to upsize that might be their opportunity to make get back in the black on the project. That might be a scenario where you say, I'm going to go ahead and go with another plumber for that to get another bid. And that just keeps people honest in the process. You don't want to give leverage away. You want to retain all the leverage as much as possible as the homeowner,
Yeah.
including there. But it's one of those things where just by having that leverage, you probably don't have to use it.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool. All right, so this kind of gets us to the next point, which is we've talked a lot about ways for the price to go up over time. Uh, how what do we need in the agreement for when we're actually forking over money? When when we're actually paying for all this stuff?
Yeah, great. Let's talk about that. What the main most important thing in your payment terms? A lot of times, and Carlos has a great draw schedule up here. So you want to take a look at the payment schedule and make sure that it's commensurate with progress. The main thing, and banks have been doing this is how banks do construction lending, is that you don't pay ahead of progress. So if the project is 10% complete, then you're going to pay only 10% of your budget. And so you want to make sure that the milestones that are provided are commensurate with that. You're not paying a large upfront deposit. You're not the contractor in California can only charge a $1,000 deposit or 10% of the contract, whichever is less. And then you want to make sure that they are progressing on the site, and as they are progressing on the site, you're only paying against what has been performed. That means that the invoice that they're giving you has to clearly outline what has been done, and then you have to go and look and make sure that those things are being done. If they've ordered the cabinets, that those cabinets are on site, or they have a receipt to prove that they were ordered. If they're billing you for foundation, that the foundation is complete and has received a sign off from the city. So, and that is what protects you. And the reason that you're doing that, you're only paying against progress, is because if you have to terminate your contractor, and we definitely hope that that doesn't happen, but if you have to terminate your contractor, somebody else is going to have to build with the remaining budget. And so you want to be able to build with on the budget that you had originally anticipated.
And in many cases, not even a termination of life happens, right? So maybe the
Yeah.
contractor has a emergency in their family, or they themselves have an emergency, and then the job just has to be transitioned to a new contractor. And we've done this particularly in our funds control efforts, supporting banks, about a half dozen times. And it's not a simple process. You have to work through a lot of liability issues. But at least if you don't have to worry about the money being there, then at least you don't have to worry about that. So, but it does occasionally happen. So you want to structure your payment process, and what I've put here in this chart is a good framework on when those draws happen. So draw one happens when you do your foundation and your primary structural work, and that's a good chunk of 20% of the budget. It also allows the contractor to order all of those finishes that they have to order, but by now they've built their foundation, they've done their site work, they've done whatever demolition, and your site is, it's ready to go, it's built, your foundation's built, your primary structural work is in place. Second draw is after framing and rough mechanical, electrical, plumbing is in, and your inspector has signed off. The third draw is after insulation and sheetrock. The fourth draw is after installation of arrival of all your finishes and 50% of your finishes. So all your finishes have been ordered now, and 50% are installed. That's your fourth draw. Your fifth draw is upon 95% completion of interior and exterior work. And then your last draw is really the last 10%, which you hold until you get your final inspection approvals. And so by then, all of your risk is gone, your project's complete, and you've done what we call the blue tape walk. So this is important because the owners at the end, just so that you're happy, ask your contractor to end it all with your blue tape walk. So you walk through after all your final inspections are complete and everything's approved, and you're just marking all of those areas that, once you're living in there or renting it out or whatever, it would really just annoy you because, there's that big mark on the sheetrock that you don't like, or there's the scuff on the baseboard that bothers you, or the doors don't seem to close well. these things. You want to handle those and then close the job out when you're 100% satisfied, and then only after that do you release that last 10% to the contractor.
Yeah, makes sense. And so this draw schedule is a good example of completion, like what percentage you should consider complete at each of these phases. Whether this exact schedule appears in the payment terms or they pick something else, you want to never be too far ahead or ahead at all of these types of milestones, right? Where it's like, hey, because a homeowner doesn't know what's a third of a project, and this is a good ballpark to say, actually, once you're done with framing and rough MEP, that's a good example of being roughly a third of the way or 35% of the way through a project. And so if you've paid more than 35% of your overall budget at that point, you're already too far ahead. That's kind of what this is for, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think also if there are different milestones, talk to your contractor about what those milestones are going to look like and do an assessment of whether or not um, that's fair, if that's 50% of the project. If it's, sometimes that might not be in alignment and it's worth talking about. And this is where you also have your line item budget to go against. I also think that it's helpful to say that payment will always be against actual progress on site. So that if, for instance, the milestones are a little wonky and you get there and the what you had thought would be 50% isn't actually 50%, you can actually pay against progress and have a discussion about what that is.
Yeah.
This is probably one of the most effective ways of ensuring the project moves along smoothly for the homeowner, because what we have seen as the most common issue is when a contractor is ahead of the client, so they've received more money than progress that's happened. Maybe they get into trouble. They've got too many jobs going at once, and they've already collected money from you in advance of work completed, but they have this other project where they can collect some money if they just advance it a little bit more. And so they pull their crew off of your project. They're going to have them work over here for 2 weeks. And you're wondering, I haven't seen anyone in my job site for 2 weeks. What's going on? And it's really because the contractor is trying to just make their bills, balance their bills. And so they're working another job for a bit to try to get some of the funds. You can prevent that from always ensuring that the contractor is behind you in terms of payment. So they've done the progress and then they get paid. That way, they're not having to, or not having to, but they're not leaving your job to go to another job. And while it doesn't happen, very often, it does happen. It's probably one of the most common issues in construction that we see that causes problems.
So I've got kind of two scenarios. I think I know the answers. I think one's okay and one's one's a flag. But so the two scenarios. One, somebody wants to make a big materials order, and they go, hey, once I place the order, I can send you the receipt, and you pay for that. That can be a way that they structure the payment terms that would kind of fluctuate from this percentage milestone because maybe you've ordered material ahead of time, but you need to see an actual receipt. Is that about right?
Well, there's also some nuances with that.
Yeah, go for
As a
it.
funds control company, we discourage that specific process. What we encourage is a direct payment to the vendor. So if I'm going to order $15,000 worth of lumber, then let me pay the lumber company directly. And then I expect to see that lumber arriving on site before any other payments are made. Because what we've seen, again, not too often, we just learned by seeing the really bad examples. There were instances where somebody would order $50,000 in lumber, but it never arrived to that job site. It might have arrived to another job site. And so we just learn by seeing these things what to avoid. So you want to pay the vendor direct and you want to wait until it arrives at the job site to sign any lien releases. And you also want to make sure that before any next payment, all the materials are on site.
This is a random story that I heard on an architecture podcast about Frank Lloyd Wright, how he achieved one of his like cheapest ever Usonian houses. Is he just was having the materials delivered from another job site. It was very cost effective. But so we don't even have to make up examples. This is historical documents. Okay, and then the other one. This is a contractor who does not have a very well defined payment schedule. You don't spend enough time in your agreement or communicating with them about how you're gonna compensate and keep up with progress. And they just say, "Hey, I need to pay my crew. It's Friday. if I don't pay, they're not coming back next week. Uh, I just need the cash. And you know, maybe you're already behind or you're facing deadlines. You really want to move a family member to that unit on time, or you know, you have a real reason to want to finish. And now that you're $100,000 into this project, suddenly this is how the conversations are going. What happens in those scenarios?
Well, I'll say it from big picture. Let Laura speak to, how legally you might structure that. If you're in that situation, you're already in trouble. Structure your agreement so you never get in that scenario, and don't let the struggle of someone else's personal business become your issue. You have a contract, you stick with the contract. Those kinds of stories that you tell, which we never get into because we never allow our contracts to go in that direction, either representing buyers or as contractors, where we're trying to peel away money to make payroll on a Friday. Like that's just a bad situation to be in. And so, as much as possible, structure everything so you don't end up in that situation. But if you do, and you need to protect yourself, maybe Laura has some ideas.
Well, I think uh, first of all, I think it's important to have the big picture and the idea that you're going to solve it by giving this the contractor more money at this moment versus taking a step back and evaluating how you got there is the first step. You hopefully have the termination clause in your agreement that would allow you to terminate, and you've been tracking progress. But even if you haven't, you need to have that termination clause that gives you an out so that you're not married to this person, so that you're allowed to terminate the agreement if they breach if they breach the terms. And then I would take a step back, allow that Friday to pass, and have a sit down with the contractor to understand the plan to get the project back on track. I will say in all of our projects where there have been issues, there are normally flags that happen before somebody says this is, you know, before the whatever the proverbial ball drops. And so you really have to kind of be paying attention to what's happening in your backyard or in your house. If workers are not showing up, if you start on day one with 10 workers and all of a sudden, workers are missing a few days and they're coming in, that's a sign sometimes, not just, it depends on where you are in the progress of the job, but sometimes that's a sign that there are other issues going on about payment. But I would say, Ryan, in that situation, I would not make the payment. It's like good money going after bad. I would sit down and come up with a comprehensive plan that was written down about how you can get the project back on track. And if it sounds like that contractor cannot do it, then you need to terminate and find another solution. Willis, what do you think?
Well, what do you think, Laura, of structuring it as if, let's say you get in that situation and you have that meeting on Monday, and you're hearing all of the complaints about my crew's not going to show up on Tuesday, all these things unless I get my money. Um, Doing it as a loan that can then be shifted over to a payment, forgiven as a loan, if you will, if progress is made to catch up to the payment, right? Because then the money is still owed to the owner. I don't know, just an idea. But again, we try not to get in these situations as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that you could structure it that way. It kind of makes an assumption that now your contractor borrower is good for them for the money. So I think that you could structure it that way. I think that I'll say that there's more risk associated with that kind of thing. So it really depends on how risk tolerant you are and how much the money is. If it's $2,000 or it's $10,000, it's also going to be a big difference.
Fair
And the
enough. I think
vibe,
Ryan, what
right?
you're hearing is don't get in this situation,
Yeah,
folks. And if you
exactly.
do,
Like you're
take a
now you're
step
making
back.
judgments about finances on a business you don't know. You're
Yeah.
like, is this a good faith problem or is it a bad faith? Like, oh my God. On the other hand, if hopefully you're watching this video before you've signed an agreement, you can
Yeah.
just make sure to work with your contractor to get an agreement that you love in place, that protects both of you, that ensures the contractor is going to get paid on a regular schedule in a predictable way, kind of sets forth what the contractor can do when the inevitable changes come through. So the contractor should be happy, and then you're happy because you have more predictability in a process maybe you've never been through that is a very large number, and you want predictable answers. Okay, but it is a ton of work to do all that. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what you guys do.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So we are full service development service company. We do specialize in ADUs and new home construction. We built mid rises down to single family fix and flips. We do site assessment, which we've done hundreds of site assessments throughout California. These are for ADUs and other projects. We do entitlement, so we also project manage through the process of developing your designs to submit for permits, and then from there we can construction manage a project or be your licensed contractor. Let's say that you don't want to deal with all the stuff that we just talked about. You can pull us in as a construction manager for a percent of the contract, and we can help you from structuring your contracts, everything that Laura has learned over the years. She does phenomenal contracts, all the way to how to structure your draw processes, how to do bidding, how to ensure that you get good competitive bids from qualified contractors. We can help you with that. So we do all of that, one-stop shop for any any design build project, but especially ADUs in this context. And then this is our contact information is in this slide here if you want to reach out to us.
And we're going to throw a link in the description below where you can go and like read more about the services and get in touch with them. You guys do the site assessment statewide. Are the other two things regionalized?
Correct. Yeah. So we do the design and build throughout the East Bay. So from San Jose up to Richmond, from the Bay over to Concord.
Yep.
So
Cool.
our particularly construction is in that area and construction management.
Well, I really appreciate all the effort. I will also, I always have to say it. If you're outside of that range, but you're in the Bay Area or SoCal, Sacramento, Realm does help with the bidding process, getting multiple bids in from GCs and stuff. And so the links to that in the description below too. Okay. If you want to watch more videos about kind of the early stages of your ADU planning, check out this playlist. And if you want to just see what YouTube recommends, go here. Thank you guys so much for coming on, explaining a very thick topic, very dense topic, and it's always a pleasure. Yeah, look forward to hearing lots of people using this advice in the comments. Let us know.